Welcome to the Neurodivergent Lens. My guest today is Jon Salmon. Jon is dyslexic and has built his career around thinking differently. He is passionate about creativity and innovation and using storytelling to challenge stigma, discrimination, and to create meaningful impact. With more than 25 years of leading digital and creative projects, his wide range of work spans across the first Reading Festival live streams, the launch of BFI Player, European Parliament projects, FIFA fan movement content, and NHS England's Opening Doors suicide prevention resources. Jon, thank you so much for being here.
Yep, well, it's wonderful to be here. Big fan of the podcast and really looking forward to our conversation this afternoon.
Thank you. I want to take things back to the beginning and ask you about your experience of your childhood experience being in school, but also when you first recognised being dyslexic and also potentially when you might have thought about diagnosis and the challenges perhaps around that.
Yeah, so the actual official diagnosis of being dyslexic happened very late into my education. I found it difficult, and I guess kind of early on, those things that probably people can relate to that listen to this podcast, that those early days of thinking that you're thick and you're stupid and why can't I remember these things that other people seem to be finding it easy to do. But the real kind of challenges happened more pronounced within secondary school. And there was where I really did find it difficult with certain subjects and fitting in a bit within the school. And yeah, I guess it was only kind of coming out of like later into the education that I got that official diagnosis of being dyslexic. But there was, from a schooling point of view, not really much that was actually taken interest in that. You know, it was almost like we were on like this conveyor belt of, just this was a place where you went to between these hours. And especially if you weren't doing that well, you were almost just put to one side and they kind of focus more on the people that were really achieving, and that could be achieving academically, or it was a very sporty school as well. So they kind of really focused in on those. So it did feel that, yeah, what could be done now and what is being done now is where with that diagnosis, a lot more is actually adapted for that person based on that test and those results. But getting that diagnosis, I guess, told me, that's why I struggle with certain remembering or learning or taking a bit longer to process information. That gave me an understanding, which was useful, but the world around me didn't change by having that diagnosis.
I really hear that it didn't affect the wider world that you were going to be going into. The sense I got was that it felt like it was quite an isolating experience, but the diagnosis perhaps gave you a sense of understanding what that struggle was about, but that you'd still gone through that experience early on.
Yeah, if I was growing up as a young person today and I got that diagnosis, I think there'd be a lot more that could be done to make those adaptations or support that could be brought in. But yeah, it didn't really make much difference to me at the time, having that diagnosis and making those kind of changes.
Yeah. And I guess I'm wondering about how you did muddle through, whether or not you felt like you were masking some of those struggles and what you were experiencing at the time.
Yeah, so I think within the classroom, I'd try and hide myself away, kind of be worried to be picked on by the teacher to answer a question or something. So yeah, I think there was an element of trying to be quiet when needed to, and that fear of being asked. And then probably joking around and misbehaving a bit when, kind of as a distraction from the fact that I really didn't understand what was being taught or how it was. So I think, it kind of showed up in a few different ways at secondary school.
So I wonder what that was like for you as a young boy within an educational system.
Yeah. I think, you do put up masks, you do try and project probably to kind of cover some of those gaps or struggles that you have. And we've created a society that has this, this approach of man up, or, boys don't cry. And I guess I've seen personally the impact that has, where you suppress and those emotions and those feelings, and how they can pop up even when you least expect it, or certain situations that can kind of happen, and how that can impact on your physical and your mental health.
Yeah. I'd like to think that actually, now that we've got more assessments happening, that children have got more support in school and more access to different kinds of, I was going to say, educational platforms or educational attainment. But I'm not quite sure, particularly from some of the anecdotal things that have come my way, is that this is necessarily true of all school environments, that actually the playing field has actually leveled out, because I still hear people, or dyslexic students or neurodivergent students, still having to mask and camouflage and it not being picked up at school, and this kind of like homogenized system that they have to learn within. And it's not something that kind of suits the individual, actually.
In the last year, I've been looking at with my kids going into secondary school, and there's a vast improvement to what's happened within the educational system compared to when I was there. So like on one level, I see, whole departments that like for special educational needs, and there's people there to help now. There's the understanding, there's the knowledge. The funding isn't there for the demand. So we've kind of hopefully started to create a society where people do get the diagnosis earlier, whether it's dyslexia or being autistic or whatever it may be. But also then I do see a struggle on the school that then have a limited amount of budget and capacity to support those individuals. And so I think schools are doing an incredibly great job with a limited amount of resource and funding. And again, if we can change the way that the educational system works, that it is around the individual and it's around trying to create environments. You hear about so many young people that are neurodiverse that get excluded from the classroom because they are being told to sit down for hours on end. How's that, fair on somebody that you've stuck somebody in an environment that's not right for them, and then they're struggling in that space, and then you say, rather than, oh, I can see you're finding things difficult, you go the opposite and say, right, detention, or you're going to be excluded. And so we've got to change that, because I think sometimes we've got some things right, but then we're still using this old way of discipline and teaching where people don't fit into this pre-prescribed mould that doesn't work for so many kids.
I hear you, and I know that so many people kind of have said the same thing, reported the same thing to me, that kind of homogenized system doesn't work for everybody, particularly neurodivergent children. So it's interesting that you've got this sense of having to try to come to grips with or understand that there's a difference somehow in the education system, and at the same time, then that we know that there are other lived experiences happening for children or students outside of the educational environment, things that are going on at home and adversity there and challenge there. And I know that you had mentioned about your father, and so I'm just wondering how that was for you to be coming to terms with managing some of the challenges around education, but also having to manage some things around mental health and mental health struggles.
Yeah, talk a little bit about kind of while I was at college, just say that, education-wise, that was working for me. But yeah, what was happening at home was my dad, who was somebody that was incredibly, he was like a school governor. He was very entrepreneurial, had his own business over the years, loved classic cars. And to see somebody that was such a wonderful human being, get depressed, get really anxious, lose the motivation, and that decline in his own health is obviously incredibly tough. And when I was 17, he sadly took his own life. And so, having to deal with that, it's obviously incredibly traumatic for me and my family, and for other people that knew my dad, to have that loss. But it was very, it was very, very difficult for people to know how to talk to me about that loss as well, because of the stigma, because of the way that he had died. So I think there's, some real difficulties there. But I think it is that stigma and discrimination, or that stigma definitely around mental illness at the time, that made it found very difficult for me to kind of know how to look after my own mental health. But also other people around didn't know really how to engage with the conversation about my dad's death. So yes, society didn't know how to talk to me either.
Yeah.
And so that period was incredibly tough. But didn't get any counselling, didn't get any real emotional support at that time. And it really was the mode of be a man, and bury those feelings, emotions, be there for your mum, and just try and just crack on. And that as a way of coping, that worked for a couple of years. But as I said kind of earlier, that if you don't deal with those feelings or emotions or things going on, that they will come back.
Yes, indeed. And firstly, I kind of want to say thank you for sharing that. And that must have been awful. And what a trauma to have experienced in your life, but to have lost somebody so meaningful, but such a role model for you as well. I think you're touching into something so important, that young men particularly struggle around emotions and talking about things that are traumatic or things that are life impacting, such as losing a parent. You're also touching into something about the social construct that society is built around how men, in inverted commas, should be, then to have buried your own feelings. And one of the things that I have come across, particularly neurodivergent individuals, have that heightened sensory response, which is also a feeling response. So I'm imagining what kind of anguish you would have been internalizing. And what we do know is the more we internalize things like that, then the more it tends to show up in other ways. And I think you had mentioned something about then having gone through your own mental health episode.
The things that just don't make sense on paper was, academically, I had really struggled at secondary school. And during that real time of the chaos that was going on at home and everything else, educationally, I did really well at college. And so that separation between home life and college life was really, really helpful for me. What that allowed me to do was come out of college with grades that were good enough to be able to go to university. But again, because I wasn't dealing with that trauma, it was almost like I was trying to put more distance between my home life and somewhere else. So by going to a Bournemouth University on the beach, make new friends, don't need to talk about my past. I can create a new persona of who I am in this new space. But as I say, resting there is those experiences that, again, I haven't dealt with. And it was a few years later in my first kind of career. So I'm going to take you right back. We're going to 1999. So before the turn of the millennium, I got one of my first jobs in London working for a company called AOL. And so they were the start. Do you remember the CDs that used to come through the door?
Yeah.
We used to use them as coasters. And that was an incredibly exciting environment to work in. It was the start of the internet. The dot-com boom. We were building some of the first kind of e-commerce websites, trying to convince people you could shop online. And again, it was kind of a work hard culture. So, you would be in quite early, you would work quite late. There would be always somebody joining or somebody leaving. So there was always kind of parties and drinks, working weekends, and also being young into your career. I was very bad at asking for help. And I think the combination of the work hours, the social, not asking for help and kind of just trying to be as good as I could be, and the trauma of my dad, that all just obviously just came to a point one day where I literally just woke up incredibly scared and really nervous and very, very anxious and paranoid. And it was that moment that I'd gone from one day being in work to the next day being in hospital, then sectioned. And so it means that you can't leave that hospital for a period of time until the doctors feel that you're in a space where that you're not going to harm yourself and for your own protection. And looking back, what is quite difficult talking about that was the same mental health unit that I'd only, it was only a few years ago that I'd visited my dad in. And so it really had this feel of like, revolving doors, or like, now I'm here. I don't know. You can look back on life, if I'd got help around my dad's death, would I have ended up in the hospital? Don't know. But something else that you touched on really importantly as well, better understanding now of being dyslexic, of being like neurodiverse, of how my brain kind of processes and works information, and talking to other people and starting to think, is there, that's worth further investigation, like how people react to different experiences based on how they process information. And I was off work for the best part of a year, and that wasn't a straight line of getting better. There was some real ups and downs within that year, but I got through it.
You got through it.
And I got really great help and support in the end. Some counselling, CBT, so day patient at the Priory really gave me the right help and support. And I think that saved me. And I know that if my dad had probably had that support, he would potentially still be here today.
Things would be different. I really appreciate you sharing so authentically and so candidly about that, and can see how terrifying that would have been as an experience. And I guess one of the things that came to me when you were talking was that sense of internalized feelings, and some of that being around shame, some of that being about stigma of not wanting to be judged. And I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I'm curious as to whether or not you were experiencing some of those things.
Yeah, all of it. Yeah, so I think shame and stigma are at the heart of so many issues in society that we can fix. If we can take away shame, if we can take away the stigma, wow, what have we got? We've got people who are asking for help, or people that see other people that need that help, with no judgment. And you just look at so many different things in society. If you could take the shame and stigma away, how much better life would be for everybody. And so, but they're rooted so deep in how you grow up, society, what is seen as acceptable. Yeah, they're two really, really powerful words, that sadly so many things within society still have those labels attached, and that stop people asking for help earlier. And so some of the work that I'm doing now really is looking at the more preventative side of like early interventions, and looking at where you can make those changes early on, so you haven't got somebody that's suicidal or reaching kind of breakdown, or those real kind of volcanoes of emotions and feelings.
For our listeners, we will be offering some information around how to access organisations where you can talk to people about that if it evokes something for people. But what you're saying is so, so valuable. And how did you manage to get through that time? What was going on for you, I guess, to be able to move forward in your life?
Yeah, I think friends are really important during that time. So especially my male friends may not have known how to talk to me about my dad's death, but they knew how to support me. And they, whether that was going down the pub, planning activities for us to kind of get out, I guess kind of useful distractions. But, whether we were going to the cinema or whatever, going camping or away. So there were those friends may have found it difficult to talk, but they knew instinctively the types of things to do for me to help me get out and stuff. Yeah, so they were great. I think people want to help, and so people don't necessarily may feel comfortable asking those direct questions. And so much of the suicide prevention work that's kind of been done recently is trying to build that confidence in people to actually, if they are worried about somebody, to actually ask that question if they are feeling suicidal, and making sure that person asking the question doesn't feel like they have to solve the problem. We're not, by asking the question, you're not needing to fix the problem. But if you are really concerned about something, kind of evidence shows asking that direct question will be the thing that maybe saves that person's life. I think that's what's so important about the campaigns and the work that's happening around kind of mental health and the stigmas that exist around certain different diagnoses as well. If we can remove that stigma, that we can just have these more open and honest conversations, will allow people to get access to the right kind of help and support.
Yeah. And I guess I'm also hearing that having good people around you and people that could even intuitively engage with you was really valuable and helped you get through a very, very difficult time. And of course, there's something to be said about as well, recognizing that men do internalize. I don't want to generalize, but we understand that there is a kind of internalizing of feelings and not talking about things around emotions or expressing things. And I guess I'm wondering about what impact that had on you at that time, if you were, internalizing some of the things that needed expressing.
Yeah, and I think men want to talk.
Yeah.
They're no different, and that's
Finding the right environment.
Correct, yeah. And there's finding those spaces, finding those moments and times where people feel safe and comfortable to be able to share that. The byproduct of me talking quite publicly about being dyslexic and the mental health challenges I had and my dad, I've had so many people from all backgrounds opening up and sharing with me about the challenges that they've had in their life or things that they're currently dealing with. And so, that's a real honor sometimes where somebody shares something, and sometimes that could be the first time they've ever said it. And I've learned over the years, as somebody who's always trying to fix or come up with solutions and ideas, that actually a lot of the time people just want to be heard. They want to be listened to. You don't need to give the answers. And I think if we can instill that in everybody, that actually the fear of asking if somebody's okay is what happens if they say they're not, is because most people worry that, if they're not, then now I've got to do something. But actually a lot of the time is listening, giving the person the space. I'm sure a lot of the work that you do with all of your counselling and the work and coaching that you do is just providing that space where somebody feels comfortable to be able to share a bit.
Yeah.
Is so important. And yeah, of course I wanted to talk about my dad when he was ill and when he sadly died, but the environment wasn't right to do that.
Right. I want to kind of come back to or talk about some of the great things that you're doing right now. On the back of some of your experiences, you were then involved in bringing together a campaign, a mental health campaign. Say a little bit about that and how you ended up getting there and who or what was involved in it.
So to come back to your question about where I felt comfortable to be able to talk about some of my own personal experience. As I mentioned, when I was a child, even the thought of doing this podcast would have put the absolute fear in me. I didn't like being at the front of the class. I wouldn't like to be in front of at work. It was always quite awkward if I had to make a presentation or something. I would be really, really worried and really anxious about that. I think I mentioned I've got 2 young kids, and they really are the kind of guiding light for, like, as cheesy as it sounds, to try and make life for them where there isn't that shame or stigma asking for help. And it was a number of years ago, just over 10 or so years ago, where I got a phone call very sadly from my friend that told me that their sister had taken their own life, and she had postnatal depression. She had also been a close friend of mine over the years, and that was the real shock for me, that I could maybe just about understand why my dad wasn't able to get the help. But I really thought, we had moved on where somebody who was struggling, especially if they had postnatal depression or, they were already in touch with health services, that how could that have been allowed to have happened? And so that set me on I was angry, and I wanted to do something about it. I didn't know what to do. And one of the things that really helped my mental health was, it started off very, very short distances of jogging and bits of running. But running had been one of those things that I baked in to deal with what was going on in my head. And that felt like a good thing to do. And her memory was to run the London Marathon. And so
Amazing.
That year of the London Marathon was kind of rebadged as the mental health marathon. And the Royals, so William, Harry and Kate, had come together as a project. Through the work they had done, they had seen the challenges that people were facing with their mental health, that stigma that exists. And so the Heads Together campaign was really clearly just about getting one simple message across, which it did incredibly well for certain sectors of society, that we all have mental health and that it's on a scale. And sometimes it's 7 or 8 out of 10. Sometimes maybe it's a 3 or 2 or 1 even. But I think that campaign was a watershed moment for society, in that people were like, oh, right, so mental health isn't necessarily illness. It's something that is a scale. It is like physical health, where you can have really good physical health, or I've just done my knee or something. I'm now in a 4 out of 10. And I think that was a real game changer when it came to people in power using their voice to shine the spotlight on something that had such great stigma. And I ran the London Marathon. It promoted 8 different mental health charities. That's where I shared my story for the first time. Saw the impact that had by showing a bit of yourself, of what's going on in reality, showing that vulnerability and showing where things were difficult. It was the feedback from friends who didn't know what had happened to me, other people opening up and sharing struggles that they had, really reinforced how important it is to have these types of campaigns to challenge those stigmas that exist.
And here we have you being so humble about the fact that, and talking about your experience of, I don't like to be at the forefront. I didn't like doing presentations, and actually I can really concur. I mean, just doing this podcast is something that's quite unnerving, and it's like, I totally get it. But again, the motivation for me, a bit similar, I think, that what I'm hearing from you is that it feels really important to have those conversations, to let other people know that you can do something that feels really scary too. Like, I'm a great believer in feel the fear and do it anyway. I know that was a book by Susan Jeffers, but it applies, I think, in all walks of life. If we can, not everybody can, but if we can, those of us that can, step forward and try and feel into that fear and create and have conversations that other people might not, it can break down many stereotypes. And sounds like you're quite empathically attuned as well, like to your environment, but also to the team and the people around you. Would you say?
Yeah. Like I think because I know what I'm kind of good at, and I know where I struggle. I think that's actually then, exec producer sounds really like fancy, and then but actually all that is trying to do as a role is trying to bring the right people together. But also there can be a lot of imposter syndrome around those types of roles, because it is more of a coordination type thing, having diverse groups of people as well that can feed into those projects.
That is really beneficial for building those diverse communities, having neurodivergent individuals within that, because then we've got lots of different neurostyles that bring different strengths that can kind of co-collaborate on building different environments and different ideas. And I think that's a really valuable point. It saddens me when I hear of work environments that are getting rid of their neurodivergent individuals because they don't understand how to support or adapt that environment to that individual. Whereas what we know is we're so much stronger when we've got so many different diverse neurostyles at play.
Yeah, and that's what we need. We really need people to be able to show up as their true self at work. There's so many things that in my career I've just tried to find my way around it.
Yeah.
But just imagine if everybody could turn up to work and everybody has accessibility needs, and that we all have adaptations that need to be made for us. And we just treat everybody as an individual, and like, how can we create this space to work best for you?
Yeah.
That's where we need to get to. We're quite a way off that. But it is the successful work that I've done is having the most diverse teams as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you feel when you hear, like, there's a lot of stuff on LinkedIn at the moment, dyslexic thinking. How do you feel about it being promoted as some kind of superpower? How do you feel about it when you hear dyslexic thinking is this great thing and it shows up in so many ways and there's so many gifts to it, which I'm not saying there aren't, because I recognize strengths in myself that I can see they're not mirrored elsewhere. But I'm curious about how you feel about when you see dyslexic thinking being celebrated, when in a way we were educated at a time where it wasn't seen as a positive, I guess.
Yeah, and I think sometimes you for certain change to happen in society, you sometimes have to go to an extreme to be able to find a middle ground.
Yeah.
And so I think when I first heard the word superpower being associated with dyslexia, something that had incredible shame, struggles, I actually, when I first heard that, I embraced it. I thought, what? Somebody's talking about this about superpower, and because it listed as going, well, these are some of the traits, if you're dyslexic, that you're probably good at. You're probably good at joining the dots. You probably are seeing the bigger picture, and that was the first time ever that I'd seen dyslexic thinking being told as a positive. You can add dyslexic thinking now to your LinkedIn profile. You can, there's a charity called Made by Dyslexia, which is
Kate Griggs.
Yeah,
we'll put a shout out to Kate Griggs. Yeah. Thank you so much for the work you're doing.
Yeah, and the work that Kate and we talked about role models, people like Richard Branson and people that have been very entrepreneurial, but also have funded organisations to try and put a different side out there. So I think it is a useful language sometimes, but if you're struggling, if you're finding things hard, calling it a superpower, if you've been excluded from school or you're struggling in work, is anything but a superpower. But I think as far as wider society is concerned, of like making people sit up and like rethink what their assumptions are about a certain label, I think it's really powerful to sometimes have these words that make that change happen, and make people sit up and think. And I think so superpower is one of those words that does that. Yeah, love hate with superpower.
It's the Marmite effect.
Yes.
I wanted to invite you to talk about your kind of new project that you've got out there. And again, it's got people focus, it's got charity focus, and it feels really meaningful. So I'd love it if you said a little bit about that for our audience.
Yeah, so I'm working, it's an idea that I'm sure a lot of your listeners have ideas that kind of rattle around for a while. So this has been bumping around in my head for years. Music was also a really big part of my recovery, and going to gigs. And so I love music, and
Ditto.
going to a space where you can just tune into the music and tune out of everything else that's going on plays such an important part for me. And so this project really is trying to lean into that. It'd be too simple just to put on a gig, wouldn't it? You know, as kind of dyslexic and neurodivergent thinkers would, not take the easy route. So it's kind of picking up learnings that I've seen working with charities that are under-resourced, overstretched. They want to be doing music events, but actually they don't have either the in-house capacity or experience to do them. So Listen Out comes from a space of, let's create an event with music and artists, but we talked about the role models, using those artists as the voice to signpost, to help and support.
Great.
And so that could be a big national charity, or it could be a small community group that had helped them out, or helped a friend or family member. So really using those voices, role models, people you look up to be able to signpost, to support, because there's so much support out there, but people either find out about it too late or they never hear about it. So Listen Out is really trying to listen out for these organisations. We're going to launch the first event on World Suicide Prevention Day. But when I was talking about upstream early intervention, we're not going to position it as that. I just needed to find a date, really, just to hold myself accountable for doing this event. And then we're working with a local academy called the Big Creative Education Academy, and they've got amazing students. And so really trying to also help students get access into the creative industries as well. So it's got big ambitions, but we'll start off small of where we're going.
What sounds great is Listen Out is a resource there for people to access support. And I know that some of the other work that you're doing also is about being able to offer access to support. So would you like to say a little bit about those pathways and that work as well?
There's a lot of groups, people in the community doing such amazing things to support people, not just from mental health, but as I say, from being dyslexic or neurodiverse. The help is there. We have a great culture, but finding it, having that directory to access help or support is difficult for people to find. We've talked about some quite challenging things today on the podcast around suicide. So I know that you can call the Samaritans any day of the week, any time, on 116 123, and there'll be somebody to listen. There's also services like Shout. So if you don't want to pick up a phone and you want to send a text, you can send the word Shout to 85258, and that will get you into a text conversation with somebody. That's two things. Some of your listeners may know that already, but there'll be quite a few people that don't. And a good friend of mine, Jake, set up we started off just initially as an Excel spreadsheet when he was struggling with his mental health and putting down local resources and help. And that's now turned into one of the largest databases in the country, called the Hub of Hope. And so, again, we'll hopefully include the link in the description. But if you're looking for help and support for either yourself or for somebody else, it's really, really handy tool to be able to put in the postcode, and it will show you free and paid for support locally, and you can filter it around lots of different things. So I think it's just so important that we know where to go to get help as well. And again, just back to the prevention, if we can get people accessing help earlier, the need is not going to be so great like myself or others that find themselves actually in a really difficult space.
We'll put relevant links actually at the bottom of the description so people can access things from there. Jon, I've had an amazing conversation with you. I mean, there is just such humanity, humility, there is such lived experience. You are truly one of the, I'm going to get emotional, good guys.
Well, again, thank you so much for giving a platform to so many people for your podcast to share their experiences, the highs and the lows, the struggles, the challenges, the wins, the losses. So, yeah, and I think anybody that's listening to this podcast, like, honestly, even a few years ago, the prospect of me sitting on a sofa chatting to you would seem absolutely ridiculous. Yeah. And I've shared a lot today on this podcast, but sometimes just sharing a little can make a real difference. And so, yeah, that's really why I do this work now, is because I know so many people are struggling, and they need to feel able to ask for help.
Yeah. And that's exactly why I started this podcast. And thank you so much for being my guest. What you've shared has been invaluable.
Great. Thanks very much.
Thank you for joining us today. I hope that you will join us next time as we delve further into more conversations around neurodivergence. And if you liked what you heard, then subscribe and let's keep the conversation going on neurodivergence.